r/AskReddit. Teachers of Reddit, what the worst thing that happened on a school trip? This occurred while I was still student teaching. End of the year for a popular high school elective class, so there were 3 buses full of students. Plan was to go to a popular nature/hiking area. Buses dropped everyone off at one end of the park and then drove around the other end where the hiking trail ended. We'd hike along the path, see some nature and stuff, and then eat lunch on the other end of the park. Note, the hiking wasn't advanced or anything, but there are some narrow paths and steep drop-offs in places. Since there were a lot of kids, we chaperones were interspersed throughout, with one experienced teaching bringing up the rear so no one got left behind. Everything goes well, and we finish lunch and board the buses around 1 in the afternoon. My bus was set, so we waited for the other 2 to confirm they had everyone. And waited. And waited. After 20 minutes or so the students were antsy and we were confused as to what was taking the other bus. Then rumors started coming in through student texts. So and so fell down the bluff, so and so had to be carried off by another student, so and so died. Head chaperone came to the bus and just said we are driving back to the other entrance. Turns out a group of students snuck into the park the night before and hid a bunch of alcohol off the side of the trail. Then during the trip they snuck away from the teacher and proceeded to get drunk off their asses. In her drunken stupor, one girl took a tumble down the bluff and either broke or badly sprained her ankle. The rest of us then got to wait an additional hour at the park in trance for the ambulance to get there and take her to the local hospital. She was so clueless or still drunk that she was grinning and waving to everyone as I loaded her in. The rest of the trip was cancelled that day, and for all I know that field trip got cancelled for good. 10th grade in German high school, 15 to 16 yo. In 1985, Cold War era, our class went for 1 week to Prague, in then communist Czechoslovakia. One of the students was a self-professed neo-Nazi, which was totally out of whack with the rest of us and nobody really wanted to have anything to do with him. Anyway, one evening in the hotel, I hear some weird music start blaring, and then suddenly a huge argument in the next room erupts, where the Nazi and 3 others stayed. We had 4 PPL bedrooms. Curious, I walk over, open the door, and see the weirdest scene. First, I notice a boombox standing at the open window, BTW. It was already dark outside. The strange music I heard is now unsplittingly loud, and after a moment I realize that it's actually Nazi German marching music with a soldier choir singing Nazi hymns, blasting right out into the communist night. Next thing I notice is the quite overweight Nazi in his black Doc Marten standing next to the window, holding a seriously huge hunting knife up. No effing idea how he managed to get that over the border. We came by bus and weren't frisked all too thoroughly, though. And in front of the round spectacles wearing one ape fascist stands a friend of mine, trying to get at the boombox to shut it off. I then start yelling at our Nazi fella and my friend seizes the opportunity to throw something, a shoe, I think, but never asked, which hits the boombox, topples it and the thing falls out of the 2nd floor window, crashing on the street below. Silence. Then Nazi boy freaks out, storms at us with blade raised, and we both make it out of the door in record time, along the corridor, into our room and lock the door from the inside. A second later we feel the door shudder, and Nazi boy hammers against it, screaming on top of his lungs that he's going to kill us. This goes on for quite a while, until he finally leaves. An hour or so later we dare to open our door. The corridor is empty, but we see on the outside of the door a dozen or so deep knife blade shaped holes. Didn't sleep well that night. PS, during the whole incident no teacher came, and nobody from the hotel as well. Next day we learned that both teachers and most of our class were out drinking that night and were totally oblivious to the whole incident when they came back late. Nazi boy behaved next morning as if nothing had happened and nobody asked about the knife marks on the door. The hotel staff either didn't notice or decided not to bother their capitalist guests, I assume. Anyway, my friend and I decided without much discussion not to tell the teachers, out of some youthful notion of silent heroism or perhaps also because we thought we might get in trouble together with Nazi boy. I don't really remember. In hindsight, the thing we should really have worried about was the Czech police in communist Prague, of course. The few other students who were also at the hotel at the time had only heard some shouting and banging, and only one asked me what had happened, and I told him we had an argument with Nazi boy, which was nothing new, so that was that. Fond memories of a dilapidated, grey-brown Prague and great beer, though. Not a teacher, but one of the students involved. Last month our class, 17 plus 4 from another school, of people who study Russian went on a trip to St. Petersburg. It was the last night there, and a friend of mine, we'll call him S, and I shared a hotel room, had bought 1 bottle of whiskey and 2 bottles of liquor. 6 of us got into one of the hotel rooms and started partying. 3 of us drank a lot, 2 only a little, and 1 drank none. It got pretty wild, music blasting, through the hotel room's television in the bathtub alongside a stool. The liquor spilled everywhere. The 3rd drunk guy gave S some mood-altering pill and he slammed back first into a corner of a cabinet. He threw his clothes and bed sheets all over the place and other stuff. Finally we got him to calm down, put him in bed and he started browsing Reddit. The 3rd drunkard was already sleeping in his room, so the 4 of us, me and the ones who drank less or none, went into the 3rd room. We chilled there for a while, and 3 of us fell asleep. The guy who shared room with the 3rd drunk guy went to sleep into their room. I woke up, felt really thirsty, and since I didn't want to get a hangover I rushed to our room for water and there he was. After over 3 hours S was still browsing Reddit. We both got to sleep, and when we woke up we realized that we had like 30 minutes to be in the bus and the room was a total mess. After some cleanup we left the room in the following condition: TV unplugged. Someone had also unplugged the refrigerator, so we plugged it in, but it was full of water. The trash can was too full and some trash were left next to it. We left the liquor bottles, one of which was like half full, on a table and there were melatonin pills everywhere. I wonder what the cleaners thought when they saw the room. Somehow after all this no one had heard anything, and we didn't get caught even after S threw up in the bus on our way back home. Afterwards S told me that he noticed that during that 3 hours of browsing, he hadn't upvoted or even opened any post. There were nothing in his history. He did pretty much all this again 2 weeks after went on a school trip to China. Probably a bit late to the story, but I'll share an experience I had as a student. During the final year of HS, our school organized a couple week-long trips abroad in Europe. One group went skiing, some groups went to Berlin. Our group, along with a couple others, went to Barcelona. Our hostel was on the outskirts of town, so we generally used the metro to travel to the center. We were divided into pairs and each pair was given one of those 10-trip metro cards you had to validate when entering the station. Basically, my friend would scan the card, hand it to me, go through the gate, and then I'd have to scan and do the same. We decided to have him keep the card, since he was the one going first anyway. This is important. One night, there was a fairly heated football game between FCB and one of the other big Spanish clubs, probably real but I'm not entirely sure. Because of this, there was increased police presence on the streets all throughout the city. We were heading back to the hostel, and after my friend and I went through the gates into the metro station, I handed the travel pass back to him as per usual. He went on ahead. I hung back to wait for some other friends. As we eventually passed the corner of the tunnel, we were greeted by a line of Guardia Civil. Now, for anyone who doesn't know the Guardia Civil, these guys are not to be messed with. They carry some sort of SMG or PDW, and I've never seen them lift both hands off of the weapon. They give this kind of shoot first, ask questions later vibe. I believe they are military too, not police. So they are standing there, in a line, keeping people in check, making sure there are no riots, and checking the occasional metro pass. You can see where this is going. I get stopped. My travel buddy's already cleared the check way before me. He's totally out of sight by now. I don't speak Spanish. I'm trying to explain in English, but they won't even listen. I promptly get pulled aside by not one, but 2 of these dudes. After what feels like an eternity of standing there, I notice my classmates are seemingly not even aware of what is going on, so I try to move in their direction to get them to fetch my travel buddy to show the metro pass. Bad idea. This dude pulls me back by the shoulder with such force that I nearly fall over, pushes me against the wall with one hand firmly pressed against my chest, the other hand wrapped tightly around his weapon's grip, towering over me, his eyes fixed, staring at me as if I just killed his daughter. My heart dropped. I couldn't make a sound. I was terrified of even breathing. Thankfully, one of my friends noticed the commotion, and it didn't take long for my teacher, who was fluent in Spanish, to arrive and explain the situation. I was released and sent on my way, rejoined the group, but it took a while before I managed to regain my composure. TL. Doctor was pressed against a wall and guarded by a pair of well-armed military police because my friend had my metro pass. I was a middle school chorus director. I took my ensemble on an overpass trip to a theme park. I had a no couples policy with room lists. Same-sex couples couldn't room together. Otherwise, kids picked their own roommates. There were 4 to a room. I had a female couple that were raging mad that they couldn't room together. They got their parents involved to try to force me to let them room together. Mom didn't know the girls were together. I didn't want to out the kid to her parents, so I lied and said that they get in trouble together in class. The parent was still mad, but dropped it. Because of their last-ditch effort to room together, these 8th grade girls ended up in rooms with 6th graders, since all their friends had already signed up for rooms. We hired an overpass security guard for our trip. In the middle of the night, one of the girls in the pair comes out of her room hysterical, claiming her roommates are bullying her and she needs a safe space. The security guard escorted her to a room where she'd be more comfortable. I'm sure you can guess what happens next. These 8th grade girls have a night of sapphic passion with 3 terrified and confused 6th graders huddled in the other bed, live texting their parents. I wake up to a text from the security guard telling me the room change, in compliance with our safety protocols, and irate emails from the parents of the younger girls. We get back to school, and girls claim I'm a bigot and targeted them for being gay. The mom insists that her child isn't a lesbian, and I'm assuming negative things because she plays softball and isn't very feminine. Because I didn't witness it, there wasn't anything I could do. And since an adult, the security guard, approved the room change, they weren't in trouble for breaking the very clear room rules. Because I lied to the mom originally about why they couldn't room together and refused to the kid to her parents, I couldn't press the issue. The younger girl's parents were furious, but their anger was rightly directed above my head. I had multiple chaperones, an overnight security guard, and a behavior contract for the trip. The parent also didn't want to out the kid and they dropped it. The older girls continued to try to get me in trouble for discrimination/bigotry for the rest of the school year. Fun fact, I was the Gay Straight Alliance sponsor at the time. They were members. TL. Dr. Lesbian students pulled a sneaky and roomed together on a school trip. Had lots of lady lovin' in front of their 11-year-old roommates. Parents all got mad for different reasons. Because none of us wanted to out the kids, they got away with it. I spent a year dealing with complaints from the couple accusing me of discrimination and bigotry. Germany here, went on a school trip to Berlin. Generally a 10th grade thing to do, some years ago. Also not a teacher, but part of the class in question. I have only really heard accounts of what happened, but here goes what I recall. Basically we get up early for some museum we were going to visit. Teacher specifically made a point to stretch our budget with as much program as possible to keep the class in check. That morning we all move out, but one student is held back because his face is bright red for some reason. Assistant teacher was sent to the doc with him to get it checked out while we head out. So apparently the doc said it was most likely some sort of reaction to alcohol. Big oopsie. We were all 16 plus at the time, bar that one guy who had to start attending uni at 17 because he was so young, so legal drinking age for beer and wine, but the hotel had a no alcohol rule and the class trip was also supposed to be alcohol free, with the chance of a beer on our last dinner together if everyone behaved. Spoiler. No beers were had. So the guy goes back to the hotel, but manages to drop a message via his phone to warn whoever was still at the hotel for whatever reason. Our teacher also heads back. We stayed behind wherever we were. We met up later that day to get told a couple different versions of what happened by the teachers and the students who were there. Basically this happened. The students managed to get into the guy's room and everyone else that they knew to check and got all of the alcohol out of the rooms, then stored them in some stairwell on the opposite side of the hotel that they knew the teachers were neither using nor aware of. We had pictures going around of the entire platform being full of bottles of booze. This part was not part of what the teachers told us, but the following part was not in the story of the students. They found a bag of weed in the guy's bag that only a few of the students knew about, namely those who bought it with him. The teacher was super mad, sat him in a train home across the country within like 2 hours, and he got drug counseling at school. He's been smoking weed still the last time I saw him. It was the most badass rescue mission to remove evidence, culminating in an entirely different bomb going off. My homeroom teacher has so many stories about school trips and stupid students, and here are some. In a delegation to Poland, the students had 3 hours to wander in a Krakow center or something, and the teacher said over and over that in 3 hours they are gone. Fast forward 3 hours later, they do a head count and find out that 3 girls are missing. They start searching like crazy. My teacher entered random shops and just screamed their names while going through all kind of scenarios in her head. They were kidnapped, stuck in the toilet, etc. It's starting to become dark and all the teachers don't know what to do. The girls' phones weren't available, and finally, the girls come back with tons of shopping bags in their hands. They got so scolded by everyone after that. In another school's delegation to Poland, during a free time period, a kid was thinking, hey, I have a good friend in Germany, why don't I go visit him? So he went to Germany via train and the whole country started worrying about this one kid who just disappeared, and they couldn't contact him either. The first year they opened my high school, it was the second high school in the city. There were only 10 to 20 12th graders, and they were all Russian. And so in their school trip there were only like 3 teachers, a homeroom teacher, my current homeroom teacher, and 2 teachers that teach about our country and its people. They're also the trip guides. During the nights they take turns in watching the students, and my teacher told us that in the middle of the night the teacher in duty wakes her up and tells her you have to see this, and my teacher, all tired and groggy, tells him to let her sleep, and what's there to see? In the end she gets up and follows him to the boys' room, and she sees all of her students, boys and girls, drunk AF, empty bottles everywhere. They start asking them the obvious questions like, were you drinking? From where all the alcohol? And apparently they just brought whole bottles in their suitcases. So the teachers brought their bottles out, and started watering the plants around them with the bottles. The kids were crying and begging, no, that one costed asterisk 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 $sign, and that one asterisk 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 $sign. They apologized properly to the teachers after the trip. I'm going to keep it light on specifics for obvious reasons. TL. Doctor at the bottom. We have a week each year when most of the school, especially the older kids, go off around the country and do outdoor adventure stuff like camping and hiking, seeing places they don't usually go to, etc. Colleagues took a bunch of 9th graders on a hike in a forested area. They were planning to go to a particular location, but it had been too wet recently, so they didn't go, and the guide told them there were some good natural pools to swim in not very far away, so they went there instead. Had to hike a couple of hours to get there. The pool they went to had a little waterfall feeding into it, maybe 3 or 4 meters, so it was all pretty cool, and they stopped there for a swim and a break. Kids were jumping in from above and swimming around, having lunch on the side of the pool and that kind of stuff. Some of the boys decided to try to go behind the waterfall, but the force of the water was too strong, and they got sucked under. Some of them were struggling to get away from the undertow, or whatever you call it. Their friends were dragging them, trying to reach them with branches and stuff. My friend, who was one of the teachers, jumped in and tried to drag the boys out. One of the kids was holding on to him while they tried to swim free, but he couldn't hang on. Guess the kid ran out of strength or something. 2 boys drowned. They couldn't find their bodies until the next day because it turned out the force of the water pushed them down beneath the waterfall, and they got hooked under some kind of ledge. Police divers came along and searched all night. Found them the next day. It obviously took a long time to get help as they were up in the hills and there were no roads to get there and so on. Of course this was devastating for everyone, especially the staff and students on the trip. One of the boys was an only son whose family had brought him to this particular country for an education. The grandfather had apparently advised against it as he didn't think it was a good idea. The other boy was the eldest son of a very influential regional family. It turned out that his mum hadn't given permission for him to go swimming on the trip. Of course there are all kinds of forms, permissions, and agreements that the parents have to sign. His hadn't been. One of the teachers saw that it hadn't been and asked the kid if his mum would be okay with him swimming, and of course the kid said yes. The local guide, who had suggested going to the pools in the first place and who assured them it was fine, denied any responsibility and put it all on the teachers. In this country, if you've got the money and connections, you write your own laws. The teachers were blacklisted by immigration and couldn't leave the country. One of them had a bit of a nervous breakdown and was signed off for the rest of the year. The others were kept off school to avoid inflaming tensions. The 9th graders and staff were all given counseling as much as possible, but factions started to emerge where some kids blamed the teachers, especially specific ones. We were having meetings where everyone was hearing lots of different stories from different people and the school board were trying to keep a lid on it, telling us the official line, but glossing over some of the incriminating stuff. Lots of pressure to stick to the party line and basically not say anything to anyone, because local reporters were hanging around, trying to get incriminating stuff, and putting one side against the other. One of the teachers sneaked out of the country in the next vacation time. We are not sure if some strings were pulled or if it was just incompetence, but it caused a bit of a scandal and made the national news. Of course, the powerful family of the dead boy went crazy and tried even harder to make life difficult for the other teachers. After a lengthy legal process which lasted over a year in which another teacher was stopped at the airport twice before managing to escape by leaving from a different part of the country, the principal was advised to go on the basis of the buck stops here. The teachers who escaped were basically free but completely traumatized. One teacher was made the scapegoat and was fired and banned from teaching, and the school was sued for coincidentally the exact, specific, 7-figure sum that it had in its financial reserve are left at the end of the year as the atmosphere had become so poisoned, and it was clear, if it hadn't been before, that our rights and protections would go in an instant if we crossed the wrong person. TL. Dr. 2 kids died in a swimming accident. High-powered families got involved. Some teachers had to flee the country. Students and teachers turned against each other. Teachers and principal fired. Went on a field trip to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was the time of year they have mass field trips for schools, so there were plenty of other schools there from different districts. My school was part of the big city public school district, mostly low income population, and the kids all got free breakfast and lunch. We went in the morning after the kids had breakfast, and most teachers brought snacks along too. The plan was to have them back at lunchtime or shortly after. In any case, they'd get fed at school before going home. So at the Rock Hall they had a good time and mixed and mingled with kids from other school districts. Around lunch, classes/schools started separating, and as we herded our bunch out, I heard some of the kids from a suburb district ask some of ours why they didn't just eat lunch there and finish looking at stuff and hanging out. Our kids were like, "Oh, we have to go back to school for lunch." The suburb kids said stuff like, "Just eat lunch here. It's only like $10. Didn't your mom give you lunch money? Mine gave me a 20" and stuff like that. Our kids got real quiet when they realized the other kids didn't have to go back to their school for free lunch. That was bad enough, but then one of the suburb teachers got all loud talking about how our kids couldn't afford to eat at the Rock Hall, and it was unkind of the suburb kids to keep asking them to stay, and blah blah blah. Sure, the suburb kids were a bit thoughtless, but they really didn't know and weren't intending to be unkind. There was a bit of a hold up leaving out as mass schools were exiting at the same time, some to leave and some to go to the Rock Hall restaurant area, so we were all bunched together for a few minutes, a bunch of confused kids and upset/sad kids. I was just a substitute teacher, but I had been with the kids for a while, knew them well, and felt so hurt and embarrassed on their behalf. One of the regular teachers went and whispered something to the suburb teacher to make her STFU, but the damage was done. I will never forget the look on our kids' faces as we passed the restaurant area and they saw all those other kids from other school districts happily eating. It broke my heart. They asked me on the bus how come they couldn't have lunch there too since the district paid for us to get in, and I said just well the district thought it best just to have lunch at school. The other chaperone teacher and I for that bus passed out snacks which cheered them up a bit, but they were subdued the whole way back. Later when asked if they liked the rock hall almost said no and it was lame and stuff like that, but I was with them and saw how they'd enjoyed it. They really had a good time up until that point. I have plenty of other horror stories of other field trip mishaps that include piss, poop, vomit, but to me this was the worst. Sickness happens with kids and you're prepared for it, but I really was in no way prepared to deal with economic class issues up close direct like that. This was about 9-10 years ago and it still upsets me. Eater, middle school kids. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.